Welcome to the Red Horizon podcast. I'm today's host, migrev-dolseg, also known as Will. I'm joined by poldec-tonteg, also known as Anthony. Anthony, thank you for joining. How would you introduce yourself? What are your roles in the Urbit ecosystem?
Man of Mystery, International Man of Mystery, the guy behind the guy. I'm currently the director of ecosystem at the foundation. The foundation recently changed its focus to being a lot more core development. I work on stuff that's not core development for the most part. On the technical side, user space applications, where that intersects with companies building on Urbit. Basically, a lot of people are interested in joining companies, not even companies, just projects, things like that. I deal with a lot of the organizations and people getting involved. I end up becoming the point of contact for a lot of people that are coming in. Before I worked at the foundation, I was at Tlon for a few years. I was the chief product officer. At that time, actually, it was after Curtis left and there was no CTO. A lot of the main core devs were there at that time. It was very much a group effort. I did a lot of legwork on the core dev side, not just on what you think of as products. I did that, but I have no real engineering background. I'm totally self-taught. I came to Urbit as a contributor. I used to be able to say I was one of the top 5 Hooners in the world when there was like 4 Hooners. Now I'm probably fallen way behind, which is probably a good thing.
Awesome. The Urbit Foundation is a DAO, correct?
Is the Urbit Foundation a DAO? Interesting question. I actually don't know. The Galactic Senate is a DAO. The Senate, which is for those listeners at home who are not fully jargoned up, there's 256 galaxies in the Urbit namespace. Those are super nodes, for lack of a better term. One of the things about being a senator, which is a person who owns a galaxy, is that you sit on the Galactic Senate, means that you have some discretion over the foundation, specifically the electing of the executive directors. The UF is under the control of a DAO. The UF is also some complicated legal organization that I don't understand. Like I get checks from there, but I'm always like, I don't understand how it happens. I would say that the foundation is maybe not a DAO, but the Senate is a DAO, and the Senate is like one of the first actually existing DAOs, I think. If we were voting on chain, probably 2017, it was real. I actually was very involved in that entire process of bringing the namespace onto Ethereum, which it wasn't before.
That's one of the most interesting parts about Urbit's development to me. It has all of these parallels with crypto, but in some ways it predates crypto.
Yeah.
Especially with things like the identity layer. Everyone agrees that the identity layer on the internet is suboptimal, but nowadays, the Ethereum community especially is running into some of these same problems, and they have their solutions out there. There's ENS, WorldCoin is apparently a thing now.
Yeah.
All of these systems have pros and cons. Do you think that Urbit ID is the right system?
Of course. Duh. I get paid to say that. No, I think it is, though. Urbit, especially the namespace, has existed forever, way before Ethereum, way before we put it on Ethereum. That's what's called Azimuth is technically the Urbit namespace on Ethereum. There's an Urbit namespace pre-Azimuth that was used in AIMS. A lot of it actually falls out of the routing model or just the networking model in general. Every once in a while, someone's, they just made this scarcity in the namespace to pump our bags. Anyone watching knows that there's more efficient ways to pump bags, certainly. That came to just the idea of having a finite namespace, which happens to actually also give it some economic value. All that thinking was well before NFTs even really existed or were a real thing on Ethereum. A lot of these problems we've been thinking about for a long time, it's like they're the same problems as crypto. A lot of crypto people, but they're come out from a different angle, which maybe the right answer isn't a blockchain. Maybe your problem is right, but your solution might not be right. The thing interesting about a lot of crypto projects, this is getting better. It's slowly getting better, but I think it is getting better. It's like a lot of them start with the premise that the blockchain is the answer to a question. They're too path dependent to being like, how do we solve this problem? Blockchain. But the answer has to be blockchain because of this thing. I was talking to Chase from Vaporware about this yesterday. There's probably some law somewhere, like Metcalfe's law or whatever, some fucking law, that technology and technical solutions are driven by their funding model. more than what they ostensibly do, or if not driven, shaped by. So we have a decentralization problem. So, well, the answer has to be some sort of blockchain, which involves some sort of token, because otherwise we can't raise money. And all those thoughts are crammed in someone's answer. It's not clear-headed, we got a problem, what's the best solution? It might be something we never thought about. That's why Urbit is different, overlaps with crypto world, because a lot of the problems we admit are the same problems. It's just that the solutions, I think, for Urbit of a bigger set. Urbit solutions are like a superset of blockchain solutions, especially have been on chain for a while and clearly are married in some way to the blockchain for the PKI. And there are situations where the blockchain is a solution, or a blockchain is a solution. Right? So the point about the ID system in particular, WorldCoin's a really interesting question, right? It's an alternative answer to the same question, which is how silver resistance, basically, right? WorldCoin has a different set of constraints on how they want to solve it than we do. One of the constraints on solving it is that it can't be a finite supply, right? That's like their whole thing.
That's one of the things Urbit gets the most flack because of its origins. People conflate it with this digital feudalism. People are just trying to own as much for themselves kind of thing.
Which is very funny, I mean, because let's just talk about that, right? Clearly people who say that actually don't know what the fuck feudalism is. Sorry, this is a children's show. That's not the opposite of feudalism, actually, right? Because generally, if you're a feudal lord, you actually want as many vassals as possible. Why wouldn't I want infinite serfs? It doesn't make sense to preclude people from being serfs, let's say. I think what they mean by that, it's exclusionary insofar as it's a finite supply. But that's like saying reality is exclusionary because finitude is a function of a lot of things. What's interesting, though, is WorldCoin says, okay, we don't want finitude. We want there to be infinite people, and we want there to be each of them to be unique. Okay. That's like just a different constraint set, right? It's interesting to see what's necessary to do that. It requires biometrics. It requires a lot of things that maybe people are not comfortable with when they see. That's the answer. Because our answer is you have a finite supply, you develop some economics around that, and then your thing just basically costs money. If you don't like that constraint, you need some constraint, right? If you don't like that constraint, then you get the constraint of centralization on the hardware that you use to prove it. All the weird things that WorldCoin has to do as a biometric thing. About WorldCoin, I actually think that people who are creeped out about it, there's lots of other things that you should be creeped out about, right? Like your phone has as much data as you as a WorldCoin node does. I don't think is as big a deal. The bigger deal is for WorldCoin to work, the WorldCoin ecosystem has to provide more value to the holder than they can get on the open market. If I'm just some dude and all I own in the world is my WorldCoin, I don't actually know the terminology, but let's say my confirmation, why wouldn't I just sell it if someone's offering money? The only rational answer is that somehow I get more out of it than the market price. And that's actually very hard to do. How is the WorldCoin network going to provide that much value that some dude who needs $20 is just going to sell it? In some dumb ways, we foresaw all these ideas and figured out actually the best answer is to have a finite supply and have it cost some nominal amount of money because people can get money. I don't know, this is like a very bizarre, it seems like an obvious thing, but it's a great fungible thing that people can get outside of your system and then trade it for your stuff. And if you try to do that all within the system, like WorldCoin is doing, you just inherit all kinds of weird problems. So Urbit ID is clearly superior technologically. Now, in terms of narratively, who knows, right? The Sam Altman name could probably sell socks. I don't know if it's going to moon or not, but I just think the technical solution is not better than Urbit ID at all.
In the Urbit world recently, there's been some discussion about what role stars play. I'm curious, what is your personal thesis on stars? Are they just glorified NFTs? Are they critical infrastructure nodes? What do you think?
Okay. Good news, Will. You're about to get a fresh rant that I've never delivered in public. If you're establishing a value for stars, right? What is the star worth? And by the way, Gary, SEC, this is just totally speculative, or this is just almost like a scientific fact. There's two elements, right? There's the price of planets, or just the economic value of a planet. And then there's the economic value of the things the star can perform. exclusive of minting more planets. So for those of you that aren't familiar with this, a star can actually mint 65,000 planets. If you're looking at that, you're like, okay, I got to know how much a planet is worth, and that would be the floor price. Upside of that on a fundamental level would be like services or something that only the star can do qua star, not qua parent of planets. Those are the two elements, right? It's interesting because these things interact potentially. Right now, people are like, oh, there's so many planets. How can we sell all these planets? They're basically, there's another knock against our kind of supposed greed. If I were to design the tokenomics of planets, there'd be 1/8 of how many there are now because there's way too many. An NFT collection has 10,000. We have however many, a lot. And
Quick interjection here. You can go to redhorizon.com and get a planet for free.
Boom, there you go. Undercutting the market. That's the right thing to do, right? At the beginning of anything, you should give things away for free. Of course, right? The first hit's free. So that's part of the thing. And so we'll go, okay, there's so many planets, people are giving away for free, they're worth nothing, which is not true. That's like a lot of things are worth nothing at the beginning when there's so much of them, and then there's pinch and supply later.
Supply and demand curves.
We're supposed to be like, oh, in Mesoamerica, there was so much gold, people just brushed their teeth with it. Who knows? I don't know. That's one side of it, is the price of a planet. That's an important part of what a star does, is it mints planets. The second part is, what can a star do? This is more to your question. What can a star perform? What services it can provide on an ongoing or one-time basis, goods or services? It's an interesting thing to think about how these interact, because one thing convinced is going to be the Urbit meta is reputation layers, both for people and also for, let's say, data feeds, data applications, things of that nature. Reputation is a very interesting application of Urbit that kind of falls right out of having this namespace. Every single platform has its own internal reputation system of some kind, right? Some of them are overt, eBay or Etsy or whatever. Some of them are covert. There was some amazing, it was so bad. Tweep cred. It's like an amazing, terrible term, but it was like their internal system of saying, okay, this account has interacted with low quality accounts, ergo it's bad. They have some sort of ad hoc internal reputation. This is a thing that everyone does, right? Metadata analysis is basically a reputation system. One of the best things about having something like Urbit is that you can develop these reputation systems that would be outside of a particular platform that other platforms can use. A lot of decentralized identity systems would maybe be able to do this, but having a general purpose computer attached to it makes it a lot easier. Let's put it that way. And ways of communicating. The thing is about reputation is that baselining reputation is like a hard problem in the research. You can read PDFs about it. It's actually a very difficult thing to do, because the thing about the default Reddit karma or whatever, it's like, how do you actually do that? Is it a default negative reputation? Is it a default positive reputation? How would you do this, right? So bootstrapping the reputation and baselining, it's very hard. And so the most obvious and tried and true is some sort of staking, right? You basically just put skin in the game to say that's how you baseline your reputation. I think that once you have some sort of reputation models working on Urbit, which is not technically complex, it's like a design problem or whatever. It's not, of course, technically complex, but it's not like a technical risk. It's like a design risk. It's like a real possibility. Once you have that, then the staking system that would be required by that will, by necessity, tie up address space. It'll need people to tie up address space. And if those address space is stars, that essentially takes 65,000 planets offline for everyone that's tied up, everyone that's staked. That's like the most obvious example to me of staking stars, which I can imagine being a thing that gets used more and more. And as that star staking becomes more of a thing, it'll actually depress the supply of planets naturally. You're going to see some interesting economics, because you're like, what's the relationship between the growth of this reputation system and how much is required to stake it, and then the price of planets and blah, blah, blah. Short answer to your question is, I think staking for reputation purposes is like the most obvious thing for stars. Once you have stars basically representing a bigger reputational stake, that's when star provided services will become more real. Right now, someone goes, oh, I'm going to provide a service for my star. And someone rightfully points out that these all run Arvo. There's really no technical reason why you got to run it from a star, not from a comet. Best answer to that is that if the operator has more to lose, they're less likely to provide low quality service, et cetera, and so forth. Just to be concrete, I use all the time is financial services industries provide or pay a lot of money for proprietary data sets. A lot of those things, their value comes from how they're processed, the provenance of the data, et cetera, and so forth. But this is a very real data market. When you look at all that stuff and you start to think, okay, if I'm a hedge fund and I want a feed of very high quality, cleaned, blah, 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 I don't know, corn production data because I'm a commodities trader. It's very interesting to think we could have decentralized data market that could provide that for you on a pseudo-anonymous basis, which would actually maybe be better for the quality of the data, but you can still have a reputation, right? So you can basically say, oh, this person has basically wagered several $1,000s that it's not going to be trash. I think once you have that reputation, you have reputation data markets, that will be a huge thing for the stars. And then what's interesting is that the star that has that reputation can also service those requests. It can be with the reputation model and the actual serving of the data.
I like this a lot, and specifically because it's a concrete idea of what Urbit as a network can do that other networks are not currently well set up to do. I run into this a lot when I try to introduce people to Urbit. Sometimes you get the response of, oh, cool, you can message your friends. I have an iPhone. I can already do that.
Yeah.
A lot of the people who are on Urbit right now, they see not necessarily technological advantages to Urbit, but almost political advantages of like sovereignty, data ownership.
Yeah.
Then you get into this discussion about, okay, if Urbit is going to succeed, does it need to have some concrete advantage that lets you do something that you couldn't do without Urbit? You can't do on a Linux server kind of thing? Or are these almost like moral implications of Urbit enough to have it succeed?
I usually think about those kind of ideological things, right? Meaning, do you value sovereignty, whatever, decentralization for its own sake, privacy? Those are almost ideological advantages, right?
See Bitcoin almost in the same way. It's like we already have money.
I totally agree. It's not an unimportant thing. It's of course very important. But in general, no one wants to hear this. It's actually easier to succeed if you have, let's say, social advantage than if you have a technical advantage. You have to have a really good technical advantage for that to be enough. And yet, fashion labels exist, right? LVMH prints money and they have no technical advantage at all. They only have a social advantage. For a technology, this may not have always been true, but I think it's definitely true now. To win, quote unquote, it needs to have both a technical differentiator is probably the best way to put it, and a social advantage. Because the technical differentiation is necessary, but not sufficient. In the case of fashion, it's not even necessary. You just see this all over the place. It's like technology is very easily cloned. There are very few things that are a actual moat. Most of the technical advantages of any web shit is like unpatentable, right? Is there like a design patent on the thread format of Twitter? It's like, no, all the sort of supposed big brainedness of these companies is just pure fluff. It just doesn't matter at all. It's a way to get themselves considered to be a technology company instead of a media company, which is basically has to do with regulation and positioning in the marketplace. It's complicated, right? I don't think having a technical advantage is enough. You almost always want some kind of social advantage, of which I mean either the social network of people that use it, the brand perception of the thing, and those kind of both feed into the ideology of it, right? Because the ideology of something can become the brand. They all kind of roll up to the brand in some ways. I'll be concrete here. Don't worry. I'm gonna come back to earth. The thing that Urbit has that no one else has and I'm willing to go on record saying this, is first of all, one, it works. Do you know what I mean? It might not work how people want it to work, but it runs, which is an insane thing given the level of ambition that went into it, right? I remember just in my life, I've seen so many blog posts about I'm going to build a category theoretically perfect operating system or the functional of it. And it's like, where is it, bro? You know, I don't use it every day. I use Urbit every day, all day for everything I do. It runs, which is just an insane thing. And it has all these technical differentiators, which I think are good and fine. And I love them, and we could talk about them more. But the real thing is that it exists in this synergistic relationship with the community. Because when you're doing something like designing a networked operating system, you need users. If you don't have users who use it for real, it's like a theoretical operating system, a theoretical helicopters. Who gives a shit? It doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean? It's funny because every weird thing, not every weird thing, a lot of the weird things in Urbit, you're like, this you shouldn't have done. Go look through the code and they find some objection, is because we actually use this thing and someone decided to take a shortcut so it actually works. There's all kinds of tests you could run on how many prime numbers it'll X, Y, Z. I remember Curtis being like, who the fuck does that? What people do is they manipulate text. And if you only know you're manipulating text, then you can take shortcuts. And that's engineering, actually, as opposed to like science or whatever. But you don't discover that stuff without users, and the users have to use it for real. You need those users. Otherwise, you're just in space. Urbit has this synergistic relationship with those users. It may be small, and you know what? It doesn't fucking matter, because it's basically like a 0 to 1 distinction. Either you have no users or you have users, right? Whether we have 5,000 users or 10,000 users matters at some level to certain people, but in terms of its value to the technology, it's less important, I would say. On top of that, for there to be 5,000 users of something that is like this weird, you need those people to be basically obsessed with your thing, to consider it its own mode of affiliation, its own subculture. We have that, which is amazing. This is something that's very slept on about Urbit. That can lead to so many more things, because if Chorus One, if Red Horizon, if anyone drops something new, an Urbit application, you will immediately have hundreds of, if not thousands of users that are very high quality and very dedicated and willing to use it and to give you feedback and to iterate on it with you. No one else has that. People just drop some crap on Product Hunt. 3 people click on it. They don't care. They're not sticky. You see what I'm saying? This is a very unique situation to be in for any software project. To sum it up, it's like a false distinction. The kind of a social, ideological, brand, culture aspect and the technical aspect are 2 aspects of the same thing. That's what makes Urbit unique. Because even you see this with crypto projects, right? To go back to the crypto comparison, people seem to have forgotten that there was a time when people use your stuff without being paid to do it, which is basically what all crypto products are. You're going to get paid for using this thing, which is like, to me, depressing. I won't, there's like a romantic equivalent, but I won't go into it. But it's like the idea that you have to pay people to like your thing is just pathetic. You know what I mean? Like, they should like it for other reasons besides being paid directly. But of course, part of the reason is that they will all evaporate once it does not make financial sense for them to be there. We have that.
Definitely the foundation of what might make Urbit work. And you, I believe, started and run one of the most interesting collectives of people on Urbit.
That's what they say.
That is definitely what people said. So I'm wondering, like, what lessons have you learned from running this group on Urbit? How to get that buy-in, how to get people to be in community in such a modern way. Humans were not really built for this. What have you learned?
I'm assuming you're talking about BlimpDAO.
I was originally talking about Hermetica.
Oh, so yeah, I run 2 groups about this.
You're very successful on the social layer.
I mean, Impresario, Urbit Impresario. But both those kind of the same answer, I think, because both BlimpDAO and Hermetica were born out of this observation that I had while working at Tlon, which is that this is a small tangent. When my wife and I started dating, she was a member of a private forum that was just her and friends of friends that all met or lived together at various times in New York. It was their private social network. There were maybe 30 people on it. I have been part of similar things in my life, mostly in the forum side of things. It's interesting because if you look at the forum, I'm just use the forum example, and it was very active. I mean, it was very active until relatively recently. It's a culture, right? Those people meet up, they have in-jokes, they talk, they travel to meet each other, all this stuff. It's its own little subculture. But if you look at the feature set of whatever PHP or whatever people were using, it's laughable, but it doesn't matter. This is something that I always see people like, oh, moaning and groaning, like, oh, unless Urbit has real-time gaming, we're fucked. Or if you can't stream Shrek 7 simulcast. What are you talking about, dude? It's just absurd. It's every commodity trader in the world used AIM basically until they shut it down. Its features only matter up to a certain point. Features are something that give shape to a culture. If a culture grows up around those quote unquote limitations, then they just creatively work around them. My observation was, okay, we've tried taking existing internet people, groups, and bringing them onto Urbit. It doesn't work generally, or it hadn't worked. It's much better now, but like it hadn't worked. Part of my rationale was the culture, the group has to grow on Urbit. Because that way, all these limitations and things is hard to do on Urbit, those can all be incorporated as constraints breed creativity. They're not just pure negative. And both Hermetica and Blimpdow are attempts to do that. How about we just build this community from scratch on Urbit? And all the things that we do, we just do them in the shape that groups and Urbit is in. We don't spend a lot of time moaning about things that we can't play real-time first-person shooters. It doesn't matter. That's not what we're doing. Hermetica started basically as a group with Sam and myself, Sam Frank, basically about all things esoteric and bro scientific. And that's been hugely successful. Every time there's an Urbit event, we have a side event. We're going to have something at Assembly. I think we're going to have a sensory deprivation tank at Assembly in Lisbon. And then Blimpdow is another thing where it's just lighter than air fanatics and people who love blimps. And what's amazing about both of those groups is that we don't talk about Urbit. Does you know what I mean? Because there's so much stuff about Urbit is like we're all obsessed with Urbit and talk about Urbit. But we need to transcend that, right? How many groups can just be people talking about Urbit? The technical nitty-gritty of Urbit. Both of those groups were this attempt to how do we grow a culture on Urbit that's not about Urbit? Also, one of the things that I really learned from both of those groups is how do you grow those groups? How do you onboard people? What kind of presence do you have to the clear web? That's a really open question that we're still very bad at on Urbit. We're just at early stages of this whole thing. You see a good post in Hermetica. How do you share that with your friend who's not on Hermetica? And when they click on it, it puts them to Red Horizon and they log in. And we're way ahead of where we were technically on how to do that. But now we got to develop the culture, the sort of mimetic ability to be able to evangelize these groups.
One more thing on the social layer. Urbit is known on Hacker News as being impenetrable in its lingo. It's got lots of jargon. There's a way to look at that as a pretty good marketing technique. Do you think that Urbit's jargon is overall net good for the project or net bad?
Absolutely. As in, the project wouldn't exist without it. Because first of all, let me give a justification of this, which I think is actually somewhat true. When Urbit was getting started, when we were starting to establish these conventions, right? It comes from a theory of language that I think is compelling. I'm not sure if it's true, but it's compelling. Which is that memorizing words is actually a relatively good, easy thing to do. Let me just give an example. Like our equivalent of a read, which is different than a read in some ways, but is basically a read, is called a scry, C-S-C-R-Y. And people were like, well, why don't you call it a read? Or why don't you call it like a read from file system, if not some absurd thing. And the theory of language is you're never going to actually find a functional descriptor, meaning this kind of JavaScript shit like pop from array or something like that. You're never going to find something that's going to make everyone happy. It's actually complicated and very grotesque to try to have a functional description of every variable. It's ugly to do that. And it's never going to make anyone happy. Why not just basically treat the name of something as a tag? My son at his school, he's like 5 and he's not that good at the reading yet. His cubby he has a symbol every year and he's like a little sun and his friend's this acorn. This is not rocket science to have this kind of non-semantic or only semantic tag for something. That's the system we opt for. We constrain it to 4 letters generally, and if not 4 letters, then brevity, simply because otherwise you're just going to be like bike shedding forever. Just picking a random variable name is actually a rad way to name things, I think, because it's just more convenient. And if you use Urbit a lot, I've never once thought about it. I don't ever be like, oh, I wish this was something else. I've never thought about that. And I don't even program that much. And I'm sure people that program Hoon a lot spend a lot more time with it and are thus that more familiar, right? TED is not forgetting what scry means. This is not a thing. It's basically not optimized for looky-loos, which is like, why would you optimize for looky-loos? Why would you optimize for spectators? If you don't like it, I don't know what to tell you. It's not for you. The functional reason, which you can argue with, but it has a rationale, not just random. It's not just arbitrary. And if it is arbitrary, it's as part of this sort of grander scheme. It's clear that it is in the Urbit project, we make technical decisions. There's no real distinction between a technical decision and an aesthetic decision. That is something I think is unique and I think we should hold to. It attracts the right people. I think the right people, I'm speaking about like contributors and technical people, they understand intuitively when a mathematician says something is elegant, that is an aesthetic distinction. That's an aesthetic criteria. And that's valid in mathematics. Why shouldn't it be valid in other things? I remember reading Urbit for the first time. You get the impression, you're like, wow, I don't understand what the hell is going on here. Have you ever read Book of the New Sun?
No, I never have.
By Gene Wolfe? Okay. Your homework, and everyone who listens to this, their homework, is to read the Book of the New Sun series. It's 4 books by Gene Wolfe. It's like Urbit canon. Something about Urbit, but there's a lot of crossover. It's probably the first book recommendation that I received on Urbit back when Urbit was like temp terminal only. There was no scroll back. You had to just be in the chat all the time. You read it and it's got so many obscure words that it's like reading Finnegan's Wake or something where you're like, is this even make sense? One of the things that Gene Wolfe does is like, he doesn't actually make up new words. He just uses like extremely rare words. You get in this kind of state where, it has internal consistency. It's a real world, but it's a different world than mine. That's what people should feel when they come to Urbit. This is real. Like I said before, there are 5,000 people using this. This is real. This is not a PDF. This is not a blog post. This is a real thing. And it's different, but it's real. The special sort of naming conventions, they definitely feed into that. I don't think that was his plan, honestly. It's just what has come to be, but I think it's been enormously beneficial for the project.
Awesome. 2 more fun questions before we get out of here.
Do it.
The first one is, there's some big names in the developer community on Urbit. Everybody knows Ted Blackman. Everybody knows Master Morzad. I want to know, who do you think is the most underrated developer in the Urbit ecosystem?
Wow.
Someone who people might not have heard about, but you would really ship out.
That's a really good one. I have 2. One is Midden Fabler, who you might know, actually. He's done work for Chorus One, I think, in the past.
Yeah, we use his a lot for figuring out when chips are down. Yeah.
He's just a great developer. He just builds things that people need, which I really appreciate. There's a problem. This is going to be also my other thing, which is water parter. Having the big brain, but being able to restrain it such that you can deliver a thing that's useful for real people with real problems is like a combination that is too rare. Either you have people that are like so gigabrain that they like immediately go into space, or people that are just basically like hacker, like me, like a hacker in the lowest sense of the world. I can get it to work for myself, but good luck. Guys like Midden Fabler and Waterparter help with a lot of the air, which is like our HTTP server stuff. Some of they've done is because of the way Urbit is designed, there are certain things that seem crazy that are very easy to do, and certain things that seem easy from the outside that are hard to do. For example, we have to implement our own HTTP server. Getting that to be a nice HTTP server that people can use for their blogs and stuff like that requires us to do, in some places, a lot of work. And not really a lot of work, but like a lot of parts of the system need to be changed. Waterparter was able to do that. I'd say Midden Fabler and Waterparter.
Shout out to them. Final question in a similar vein. What are some lesser known applications on Urbit that you have been enjoying recently?
My favorite application, probably by far, is Monkey by Midlev Mindair.
Did he write Astrolabe?
He did Astrolabe and he did Monkey.
Okay.
So Monkey is essentially a monkey patcher that will inject JavaScript at a path, if that makes sense.
What's
So basically,
patcher?
there was a Chrome extension way back in the day called Grease Monkey. Was used for insecure purposes, so Chrome got rid of it, but it basically would allow you to like inject arbitrary JavaScript to a domain. So you could say when X.com loads, go through it, just use jQuery, go through it, take out all the ads, that kind of thing. But all kinds of shit can be done that way, right? Because if you just inject a JavaScript file at the end, you can rewrite the whole page. And it's an amazing amount of flexibility over your own UI. But now you can't do that on any extension through Firefox or Mozilla or whatever, or Chrome. It's doubly necessary for something like Urbit, where I'm hosting my own UI. This is not some crazy shit. I just have Tlon's thing and they don't do something that I want it to do. And why can't I just inject some JavaScript that rewrites part of the page? Monkey app just lets you do that. It gives you like, at this path, load this JavaScript. In the Blimped Out group, for example, Little Wolfer wrote this monkey patch we call Green Room that allows you to open a gallery like in groups. If you open an image in gallery, it allows you to do basic image manipulation there. So you can add text to an image or draw things on it or whatever. But that's all done on the front end. So that's just JavaScript. I like that a lot because it exposes this kind of interoperability in this very basic. You can get a lot more fancy with it because you can also distribute it along with a backend application. You can do the sort of app composability thing that's very much talked about, but doesn't exist. People don't see a lot. Or if they see it, it's because Tlon has integrated pals. But that doesn't provide the experience of the user, or even better, in our case, like the group providing this plugin. Monkey is probably my favorite app. If we wanted to make it ready for prime time for other people, there'd be a little bit of work. But whenever we're in Blimped or in Hermetica that I want an app or want a feature, for example, I have someone writing a monkey patch that will upload images to ibb.co, which is one of these sort of like free image sharing sites. But I just rewrite the JavaScript of the input box and do it from there. That's probably my favorite lesser known app.
Awesome. Thank you, Anthony, for coming on the show. I only got through about a third of my questions, so we'll have to have you come back on soon.
Absolutely.
And to the audience, thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.
All right. See ya.